First of all, thank you so much for attending this session. We are very happy and honored to be here in this new, at least the first session after the pandemic. So for me, it's nice to be here. We are going to talk about one thing is about Azure SQL Journey, the daily routine of our Cloud DBA, because we have many questions in support that, wow, also Roberto, people DBAs that, okay, what does mean Cloud DBA? What is I'm going to change something in my work, or I'm going to change my profile, or I need to do something different in the daily by day that I have tasks that I have day by day. But in this session, we are going to explain several details based on experience in order to compare and contrast. So what is that you need to do in, let's say, in on-premises, that comparing with the different flavors that we have in Azure SQL database. Okay, so first of all, we would like to say thank you to our sponsors. That again, without this, will not possible all these sort of sessions. I would like to Roberto Montfray, you want to do it yourself?
All right, thank you. Yes, Roberto Cavalcanti. I'm a cloud solution architect with Microsoft, and I love talking about Azure SQL database, and especially in a session like this where we will compare and contrast how things used to be in the past and how they are right now. As you can see, I've been with Microsoft for quite some time, and I used to be a support escalation engineer with the SQL Server team, and things have changed quite a lot in Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. I used to work with Jose Manuel taking support calls, and we learned quite a lot about the differences between the old world and the new world, and that's what we want to share with you guys today.
My name is Jose Manuel Jurado. I'm from Spain, very close to Italy. This is the table of our contacts. What is my main role in Microsoft is support databases, Azure SQL database and managed instance. More or less, I have been working in the same number of years that Roberto is working in Microsoft. And as you could see, basically it's one thing that I like it is to work with customers, to work with people, because at the end, I'm going to learn a lot of things from you. This is the most important thing for me because it's very important. And the second part is once I have learned these sorts of things, the next step is to, let's say, to share this information, this experience, or to spread this experience with the community, because it's very important. Because at the end, the experience at the end, we are going to achieve more in our careers. So, what is the daily routine from a Cloud DBA? Okay, so first of all, let's try to create a small agenda. Okay, about from 9 to 10, we are going to choose our environment. Okay, I think that is very key point here, because when you are a DBA, you need to, or you are going to implement an environment, or you have already this environment. You need to think about what is the best offer for you. Okay, we are going to talk several details about it. The second part is, well, once we have my database, how we are going to configure my availability. We are going to talk about several details that you have by default on other options that you have that you could implement by yourself. Okay. The third part is we are going to review, or we are going to talk, for example, during your daily routine is from 12 to 31 past 1, or it's about review and configure your backup. Other option is secure your database. We are going to explain what is the main difference that we have with on-premises in terms of securing your database. Okay, we are going to talk about several details that is very important to know, and how it's possible to increase more. Other option that we have is once we have this, when we have high availability, run the configuration, run the secure, how it's possible to log and trace in the database. So we are going to talk the different things, like, for example, one thing that's coming to my mind right now, it's a SQL profiler. For example, it's if we could use this SQL profiler, for example, in SQL managed instance or in SQL database. After it, we are going to have one review about the performance. I think that is the most important thing. So in this case, Roberto will show us a demo about what is the best thing in order to monitor the performance of your database, because it's very important to pay less and to achieve the most performance. And finally, one thing that for us is very important, is a new challenge for a DBA, is help others. Because right now, one of the profile that you need to to know is you are going to work with many people, not just only with developers. For example, you are going to work with data engineers, you are going to work with analyst data engineers, you are going to cooperate with Cosmos DB, with Azure Data Factory engineers. So at the end, you are the central point, okay, in order that provide this such information. It's very important also to be a trusted advisor, that how they need to do, or they need to perform the operations. Okay, this is one of the one thing that is something different in terms of DBAs. So let's get started. So what is the most important thing when you are talking about how to choose your environment? Well, basically, most probably you know this this option. It's about we have three flavors in Azure SQL. In Azure, you have SQL managed SQL VMs, managed instance, and SQL database. If you want to use your SQL Server, but moving this information to the entire system to managed instance, to Azure VM virtual machine, basically you need to know that you have a full control of this operation. So you are going to have access to the operating system, you are going to update your SQL Server, or you could have the chance in order to install or use any other services. Okay, so if you want to do this without any problems, the best option is to go to Azure SQL, to SQL Server on Azure VMs. Other option that you have is when Microsoft manages the service. So, for example, I would like to use managed instance, but I don't want to take care about to apply the patches, for example, to operating system. I don't want to implement the high availability, for example. The best idea, but you want to, let's say, to manage your SQL Server instance, the best option that you have is to use Azure SQL Managed Instance, because you have several other details. For example, you could run a native restore, you could run cross-database transaction, you have the option to link it server, service brokers, SQL agent, CLR, etc. So this is the option that you have. Right now, there is no need to take care about the high availability, or, for example, review the backups or apply the patches, because will be performed by the service that we have in Microsoft. And finally, is, for example, when you have one database, or you have a small group of databases, or when your application don't need, for example, huge interactions with other databases, or you don't need SQL agent. Of course, we have several options to do it, to implement this one, but basically is when your database, when your programming model is oriented to the database scope. Okay, it's very important to know about it, and you could choose SQL Azure. Okay. Finally, other things that we need to know in terms of DBAs, it's about the services. So we know that right now, when we install in on premises all the services that we have, we have integration services, we have analysis services, and reporting services. If you choose Azure SQL Database or Managed Instance, right now, you are not going to have this type of services installed in your server. You need to use other services. For example, integration services, you could use one thing that is called ADF, Azure Data Factory. Or when you want to have analysis services, you could use the service that we have in PaaS that is called analysis services. Or if you want to use reporting services, you could use Power BI. That does not mean that you could not use these such of things in your local environment, or you could install in a virtual machines these services and connect to your database. No, that means that the model that you have right now, that you have installed everything in your server, let's say, will not happen in Azure SQL Database or Managed Instance. Okay, for this reason, it's very important to know these such of things. Okay, suppose that I choose SQL Azure. I would like to use this database. Well, right now, as you could see, you have different service tiers, different database and database sites. For example, you have one option that is called serverless, that is auto post and auto scale. What that mean? That means that when you choose this serverless, your database will be stopped, and also you are not going to pay for this time. When, for example, during 1 hour, no one was connected to the database. Okay, or for example, if my database is more than it's up to 100 terabytes, one option that you could use is hyperscale, because this database is able to manage this amount of data. Okay, we are going to talk about named replicas and for replicas, but basically that's mean that in hyperscale, when you define one database with amount of data, and then you could have another replicas, okay, that is called named replicas. So you could have 30 named replicas around the globe. So that's mean that, for example, if I have in my environment in West Europe, for example, I have my hyperscale, I could transmit the data automatically or replicate the data in another server that I have, for example, in North Europe, in US, etc. So at the end, our customer could connect using Power BI, any other tools, analysis services, reporting services, to obtain this data based on the named replicas. And also, you have another 4 internal replicas. That means that you don't need, if you want just only to connect in West Europe, you want to connect, you have to, let's say, 2 environments. One is for read and write, another for read replica. If you want just only to read the data, instead to connect directly to the database that is accepting the new requests, accepting the new changes, and then you could connect to the 4 replicas. Okay, so the idea is to have separated the read write and read only. We have other models, as you could see, about up to a maximum of the database sites, but we have provisioning, we have the cores, we have other model that is called DTU, and also we have one thing that is new. Well, not new, it's one thing that we need to think about several days, that is called Elastic Database Pool. In Azure SQL Database, as we mentioned before, it's database oriented. That means that you're going to choose the database and the resources that you need. Okay, but when you choose Elastic Database Pool, that means that you are going to choose several databases running in the same SQL instance. So that means that in just only one single instance, you are going to run multiple databases. That means that I could connect from one database to another database in the natural way that we have in SQL Server. The answer is no. Unfortunately, no. There is not possible to run cross-database queries, but we have one option that is called external tables that is possible to creating this external table to connect from one database to another database. Okay, so I would like to show you just only for a few seconds how is the chance to create a database. Basically, when I click here in my database, as you can see, you are going to have the definition. Second. Okay, so beside that, all the details, I'm going to type in the name, etc. Basically, one thing that I would like to discuss with you or to show you is how to configure my database. As you can see here, right now I could choose the different ways in order to choose my database. vCore model, DDU model, general purpose, business critical. Basically, the difference between general purpose and business critical is business critical has more recently and more IOPS that you have in general purpose. Basically, is this. So, for example, if I choose business critical, I'm going to choose how many vCores that I want to have in my database, or how much will be the data that I need for my database. Also, as we mentioned before, is rate scale out. Rate scale out is the replica. Replica means that basically, if I want to connect to the red replica, basically I need to change the connection string of my database, sorry, of my application, adding application intent equal read only, and I'm going to connect directly to the replica that I have for read only without affecting to my database, okay? So I will discuss after it about what that means from redundant, okay? So if right now all this such of thing is not good for you, you need more. We have other models of databases, okay? But for example, that you could have a lot of new vCores with more memory, etc. Basically, this is the different models that we have. As we mentioned before about serverless, serverless is very important. But my recommendation is when you want to use serverless, that the main purpose is to reduce the bill, because you're not going to pay for the time that the database is not in use. My recommendation is use this one when it's true that you are not going to use database, because our customer thinks, okay, I'm going to create a serverless, I'm going to use serverless, but my database is running all the time. If your database is running all the time, you are going to lose your money, okay? Basically, normally the serverless is basically for databases that you are in testing, or it's not, the frequency is not very frequent, they use, etc. It's very important, okay? For the reason this example means that if my database was not, no one's used my database during this inactive period, I'm going to pause, or we are going to pause this database. So at the end, during this period of time, you are not going to be charged for the money for the time that your database was running. Other thing that is very important that we receive a lot of cases is what happened when after this period of time that my database was paused, is what happened when I need to connect again. Well, it's in a similar manner that you have in Sql on premises. You know that you have auto closed, right? So if you mark your database auto closed, when you try to connect again, you have at least, I don't know, you need to have to wait, I don't know, 20, depending on the service of the server, but 20 seconds, 30 seconds in order to bring the database up again, okay, and use this one. Well, in Azure SQL database in serverless modes, happen the same, okay? So you need to include in your connection and specific retrial logic in order to wait more time when you when you connect to database after this period of time. It's very important because our customers say, no, I don't know what happened, but this is the reason. Other things that is very important if we compare with SQL on premises is when we pause the database, you connect to the database, you are able to connect, but the performance is not the same. Well, the answer is very simple. Is when you close your database, and then all the data that you have in memory will be automatically removed from the memory, okay, from the buffer pool, right? In this case, we'll have the same. So at the end, you are to have the same performance, you have to wait, depending on your workload, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. I don't know. I don't have an exact time, but at the end, it's very similar that we have in on-premises. So it's very important, as I mentioned, serverless, about the price, okay, about the retrial logic, and about when the buffer pool needs to cache all the data. What happened when I need to choose, or when I want to choose managed instance? Basically, you have two different tiers. You have general purpose, or you have business critical. Basically, the difference that we have in this such of things is that general purpose is the I/O, the latency is higher if you compare with business critical. Also, is general purpose, the high availability it's maintained, let's say, at a storage level. So at the end, general purpose means that the high availability that we have is based in the 3 copies of the data that we have in terms of storage. So if we need to run a let's say, reconfiguration of failover, at the end, we are going to choose a new server that is going to attach one of these 3 copies of the data that we have in storage. If business critical is something different. In business critical, the I/O is low. That means that the storage is different because the storage is local, is SSD, and also we have 3 replicas in an environment. More or less is the same that we have in on-premises. It's always on. So at the end, you could connect to one of the replicas, basically change the connection string in order to connect to the replicas that we have in business critical. At the end, as you mentioned here, as you could see, we have different elements, the number of vCores that you could choose, etc. So in trying to summarize everything, is this. If when I need to choose single, elastic pool, or managed instance, we mentioned single elastic pool. Single is when I need resources for one single database. Elastic pool is when I want to share several databases in the same SQL instance, or in managed instance is when I need to have more access to an instance level. Okay. So other things that is very important about, we have many questions about high availability. By default, as we mentioned, you are going to have high availability implemented. So every time that you create one database in your environment, you are going to have at least 3 copies. In general purpose, it's based on storage. In business critical, is based on the more or less the always on environment that we have. But also, you could add more things if you want. For example, you could create an auto failover group. That means that at the end, you are going to have one single listener. From this listener, you are going to have one server, let's say in West Europe, another server in North Europe. And you have the databases in complete synchronization between among them. Okay, so if something happens, basically we are going to run the failover from one server to another server in the similar manner that we have in on-premises right now, and that's it. Okay. Other things is about your replicas, and it's other option that we have, that we are going to have geo-replicas in Rio only across the globe. We have named replicas. Another thing that I would like to explain to you about right now is about thumb redundant. Before go to the thumb redundant, I would like to explain one thing is very important for a DBA, is the maintenance plans. Okay, so what does mean maintenance plans? As Microsoft as a service provider, we are going to restart your service, or we are going to apply you service packs at server level and host level, or multiple things, because to update the security for multiple reasons. So in this case, you could configure this maintenance plan. Okay, you could say, okay, I would like to that this maintenance plan will be in this such of things, or such of this time. Very important, the recommendation that is very important for the developers is try to implement a retry logic, because this, when we need to restart the service, our main goal is to reduce the time as soon as possible. Normally, this process will take no more than 60 seconds, but most probably will less 5, 10, depending on the modification of this day. Of course, when we restart the service, you may have some performance problems at the beginning, because, as I mentioned before, we need to cache this data again in the buffer pool in the similar manner that you have in on-premises.
So I just wanted to add about the retry logic, the importance of implementing that. I know you've been talking about it for at least the last 5 years or more, and we still have customers that are not too familiar with retry logic, but I just wanted to make sure everybody on the call keeps that in mind if they haven't seen or if you are not familiar with retry logic to this day. Moving to the cloud, that is a requirement for the application side. As Jose Manuel explained, there will be multiple reasons why the database is going to go offline and then come back online, which is not common for a SQL Server running on premises or even SQL Server running on Azure. It's just not something that users and developers are used to, but that's a reality in the cloud. So just wanted to call that out.
No, it's very important. Also, basically, for example, one thing that I would like to show you is how easy it is, for example, to implement. For example, I'm going to talk about Thon redundant, for example. But let me go first just to explain what is Thon redundant. Okay, what does mean Thon redundant? Basically, the Thon redundant means right now, or when you create one database, by default, you are going to this database will run in the same Thon. So suppose that one data center that we have in any region, we have 3 different Thons. Okay, Thon 1, Thon 2, and Thon 3. So in the end, the idea is we are going to implement the storage and the machine in the same Thon. Okay, so when you enable, for example, here, when I enable and specify here Thon redundant, the idea is the following. The idea is allocate, for example, in another replica in business is business critical in this case, another replica in another Thon. Thon means that is cooler, air conditioner, other services like water, etc., that is totally separated. Another one in another Thon. So at the end, if something happened in one Thon, this server will be running another that will run automatically these operations and bring up again the database doing this. Okay, so also, for example, what happens if I choose general purpose? Well, basically, more or less is the same. But as I mentioned before, the Thon redundant in terms of general purpose, we are not going to have 3 machines. We are going to have 3 replicas in terms of storage. So at the end, the idea is we are going to split these 3 replicas in different Thons, okay, where we have, as I mentioned, Ethernet, air conditioner, etc., separated. Okay, so it's very important. So for the reason, this is the basic things that we have about Thon redundant. As you could see, it's more recently in many. If you have any issues about it, etc., you could change, you could revert this, etc. So other things that is very important is about the geo-replication. Geo-replication means at the end that my database will replicate it in randomly in another place, in another regions. Okay, this is the numbers that we have because we receive many questions about the RTO in multiple things about the recovery. Okay, but I think that I would like to highlight 2 things or one thing here. It's about 4 readable secondary replicas. So what that means? That means that when you create a database, by default, you are going to have at maximum 4 replicas in another, let's say in another region automatically. So you could do this one, but you could have more. Of course, you could have if you combine the replica, for example, if I create a replica from West Europe to North Europe, from North Europe, I could create another replica, another 4 replicas to another place. So at the end, if you multiply, you are going to have 16 replicas around the globe in your database. Okay, so it's very important about it. The most important thing is when you are using your replica is a manual failover. Okay, so we don't have any automatic thing. You need to implement by yourself. or running the portal, PowerShell, REST IP, etc., the failover. If you want to have an automatic failover, the idea is to use failover groups. Okay, for example, here, if I want to create right now a failover groups, basically, I could go here to the failover groups. I need to create right now my group. For example, let's say Italy GM, for example. Choose the server that I want to have the synchronization. Choose what is the failover policy and what is the grace period. What does mean grace period? That mean is when we are going to initiate the failover. So that means that just only in 1 hour. So we are going to initiate the failover. The answer is yes right now, but let me explain one thing. In terms of high availability, you have two things. You have the high availability that we implement at a data center level. So remember that you have 3 copies of your database, you have some redundant, you have other things, and failover is when we have when all these, let's say, all the mechanisms failed in the region. For example, in West Europe, so we have a total disaster in West Europe. Nothing possible is it's not possible to do anything, and then we are going to automatically to run this failover after 1 hour. In, for example, in North Europe. Okay, for the reason this is the time. I'm sure that we have many questions from customers about this could be possible to improve this time or to reduce this time. But right now, I think that in 1 hour to move these such of things, it's a good number. Also, for sure that you could run the failover using PowerShell, for example, if you want to run automatically. Okay,
right. Just to comment on that one.
Yeah.
That is the time that we chose, mostly for legal reasons, not to fail over before 1 hour.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you cannot do it yourself by, like you said, creating a PowerShell script and failing over 5 seconds after the database stopped responding, or 5 minutes. Microsoft will only do it after 1 hour automatically. That's what that 1 hour means there.
Yeah.
And Jose, I just wanted to take advantage that we have here Newton Pinheiro, who is an expert in always-on availability groups. I actually have a book signed by him explaining how to do it in SQL Server. I just wanted to say to Newton, we are using always-on availability groups on the back end, but everything is done by Microsoft. So all of these geo replications that you see there, that's kind of easy to set up. We do the hard work on the back end and make it easy to be just a click away to set up those AGs all over different regions, different countries, but without the hassle of doing it in always on availability groups manually. Cool.
No, it's very important because at the end, for example, when I was at DBA and also I need to implement the always on. So to be honest with you, for me it was a nightmare. But having this option that is automatically with several clicks is possible to implement, and you are going to have these types of things automatically, and you could forget it about it. Well, for me it's
much easier now, huh?
Yep. To be honest with you,
that's why Newton wrote a book to help people do it. It's much easier now.
Okay. Okay. So other points that is very important is about the backups. Well, as you could see, in your daily routines, you need to review the backups. It's very important. Okay. So in this part, when you create a database, the point in time restore will be automatically implemented by Microsoft. So that means that you could implement your backup policy. Also, you could add other mechanisms. For example, if you want, for example, to store the backup in another place, locally in the region, in another place of the region, or in another data center. Okay, so for example, I would like to show you in just only a couple of minutes how it's possible to implement the point in time. Basically, this is my server. I'm going to choose my database, and I'm going to 1 second. It's another one. Oh, okay. So 1 second. I choose the backups is here. Yeah. So I'm going to choose my my database. I'm going to go in the rotation policies. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click configure my policy. So what does mean my policies? And the end is how many days that you want to have your backup enabled. Okay, we are doing the full backup, the transactional backup, and differential backup. Okay, so at the end, this is the how many that you want to have. Also, it's how many differential backup frequency that you want to have. This is very important, because when you are thinking about the cost, it's not the same to run every 12 hours, sorry, that 24 hours, because you know that in on-premises, when you run your differential backup, and the end you are going to take some pages, more space, let's say, that have not been modified, but basically because that means the differential backups. Okay. Also, one thing that is very important that I'm going to talk in the next slide, it's about the long-term retention. So if you want to have more that this number of days in your backup, basically you could specify here up to 10 years. So you could specify, okay, I would like to have this backup every, let's say, every 3 weeks, or every 1 year or 3 years, etc., during this period of time. So we are going to run this backup, also adding the long retention period in order to increase these sorts of things. Even when you create a database, 1 second. When you create a database, as I mentioned, you could specify here about where is the location about my database. Will be locally, zone redundant. As I mentioned, this backup will be allocated in another zone of the same region, or will be geo-redundant. Geo-redundant means that I'm going to place this backup in another location, okay, in another data center. It's very important because also is the cost. Okay, so one thing that I would like to highlight in just only for 2 minutes more is about the cost of the backups. We have many questions about the cost of the backups. In vCore, if you choose vCore, you are going to pay if the total backup during the period of time that you choose is greater than the size of your total size of your database. Okay, what that means? That we are going to accumulate, or we are going to sum all the transaction backup, all the differential backup, and the full backups. Okay, it's very important because we have customers say, "Oh, I'm paying a lot for my backup." Okay, it's very important to know what is due into the backup. For example, the transactional backup, or the transactional if you are doing a lot of transaction process, let's say delete or huge operations, and then all these sorts of things needs to be running in the backup. One thing that is very important about is how to calculate, or how how much I'm paying for the backup. Is you have one option in the portal that is called in billing page. You could see what is the price that you're paying for the backup, and also, of course, in Azure SQL database, you could export the data. Okay, you could have one process and export the data. What is the difference in Azure managed instance? As we mentioned, this applied perfectly for SQL database, the previous SQL database and SQL managed instance, but we have a specific thing in managed instance, that you have the native backup. So beside the backup that we are doing for transactional, etc., you could implement your own backup. Okay, so if you want to run this backup, basically I'm going to share with you, and in the next slides, how to do this to run this backup. If you want to run if you want to restore your backup from on-premise to managed instance, basically this is the instructions that you have, or the best practice that we saw during these cases. Is, for example, is remember to use checksum, because when we restore the backup from on-premise to managed instance, we are going to check your database. Okay, so it's very important, if you run the checksum, the period of time that your database will be in the process to restoring will be less if you have enabled the checksum. Okay, this is the example how to run a backup in managed instance. Basically, you need to create a credential. If you compare these such of things with on-premises, pretty much it's the same. Basically, is you need to create the credential, you need to run the backup, and you need to add URL. So at the end, as you know, in SQL Server on-premises, you have this option. The most important thing is this, with copy only, because you know that without using this, you are going to break the chains in the transaction log. Okay, so at the end, you have the backup log, or you could divide the backup in more files. Other things that you could see, is you could follow up the best practice about restore manage, or you could run also the export and import process. Basically, import-export process, you are going to have one file that is called with extension backpack. Backpack, it's not, we cannot consider as backup. It's an export of your database. Okay, of course, if no one is running anything in your database, you could consider a backup, but it's not itself a native backup. Okay, but it's the way that you have in order to move from a different database for different places. Other points that in Azure, as a Cloud DBA, is how to secure your database. You know, I remember in on-premises, the huge operation took a lot of time to learn. Wow, I need to implement the TDE in my on-premise environment, right? So how to do it, how to use the key, etc. And then, by default, when you create a database, we are going to encrypt your database. Other things that we have is to encrypt the data. Again, so it's very important when you have your database, when every connectivity that you have, again, your application with your database, all these such of things, all this connection will be used TLS, okay? And finally, if you want to use, beside all these such of things, of course, you could use one common techniques that we have in on-premises, that is just only allow the connections to the administrator, in Windows administrator, Windows account. In Azure SQL database, in managed instance, it's possible to do it. Okay, and of course, you have any other option that you have in on-premises. You have always encrypted, role-level security, data masking, discovery, etc. So in terms of security, I'm going to move here again in terms of security, because I would like to show you how easy, let's say, it's to implement the security in your server. Basically, it's about, sorry. This is the firewall. So how I'm going to protect my database? Okay, we are going to protect using what is the version of my TLS, what is the IP that will be able to connect, etc. Very important. I think that this is the very common questions that we have from customers when the customer implement the firewall, and they have a company, the security company, that they run a penetration test. So when you run the penetration test, you are not going to run this process against your database. You are going to run this process against the gateway. Gateway means is an appliance, it's a combination between hardware and software that will receive the incoming request from your application. This gateway runs several processes in order to protect your database, in order to protect the connection, okay, to allow to running a NAT, let's say, in order to be able to connect to your database, right? So it's very important that when you run this penetration test, you're not running in your database, okay, in your server. You are going to run in the gateway. The gateway is a mechanism, protection mechanism to protect the data and protect the connection. We have many things. I'm not going to share this information, but be sure that at least we have a lot of mechanisms to protect that no one will be able to connect to your database using any attack tactics. Well, other things that I'm going just only to think more, it's about logging and tracing. So, well, the next question that we have every day is, what happened in my database? I have SQL Server Profiler. I could use other things. The answer is, in Azure SQL Database, it's not possible to use SQL Profiler, but you have one thing that is called SQL Auditing. And I'm going to show you in a couple of seconds. Also, we have alerts, we have diagnostic settings that could help us to manage a lot of things. Okay. Also, in Azure SQL Managed Instance, we have other things about it. For example, I'm going to go to my database. As you can see here, this is the auditing. So the auditing means that all the operations is running more or less SQL Server Profiler, audit events, execution events, the SQL command statement, etc., will capture and save in one storage account. Of course, we could send this information to log analytics that in the demo, Roberto will show you how to do it. Okay, but at the end, you could send this information to this file, and the end is an extended event file that contains all the operations, so you could find all the information here, and also you could use log analytics. Of course, in terms of monitoring and tracing, for example, in one database, you could see what happened in your database. Right now, I'm running a process that is taking too much time, but as you could see here, you have many metrics. I'm not going to go deeper about it, but at the end is you could see what happened in terms of CPU, data I/O, log I/O, etc. So you have different charts if you want to obtain how many connections, success connections that you have, or a worker percentage, success connection, etc. Okay, so at the end, it's very useful to have this information because you could ping this graphic or this computerization in the dashboard, and you could create a dashboard with all your databases or all the environment that you have in order to manage what happened in my database every time. Okay, you could use this one. Other things that is very important is about the alerts. Basically, the alerts, it's about to create alerts when something is happening. For example, I would like to create another rule when for example, my database, the CPU percentage is more than 40%. When you have this, you are going to receive an email to your email mention that in this period of time, this alert was raised, and after it, and when the CPU is again in the normal threshold that you implement. And finally, one thing that I would like to highlight and finish this module is about the SQL Diagnostics. You know that in on-premises we need to use multiple things. You know that we have PSDR. You know that we have SQL Nexus in order to analyze what happened in multiple scenarios. The database, my query, my process, etc. And the end, basically, you have more or less the same using these diagnostic settings. So at the end, when I create these diagnostic settings, at the end, you have all these events for you. You have query store runtime statistics. You have weight stats. You have errors in your database. We capture when something happened in your database. In terms of error, for example, when the object doesn't exist, the table is not right, the syntax is not right. Also, you could have database with the statistics that it's possible to capture the database, let's say CX packet, PO large, etc. Timeouts, when you have blockades, you have deadlocks, etc. So it's very useful for you when as a DBA to have this information in workspace that you could manage and try to identify what happened in your database. Okay. So basically, in terms of monitoring, if we compare right now on premises with Azure SQL database, as you can see here, and I'm going to pass the floor to Roberto, it's about, you have many things. You have, as I mentioned, the overview, you have query store, you have extended events. You have one thing that is very important about auto-tuning. Okay, auto-tuning is one option that we have that I'm going to explain in just only 1 minute about if we detect after the workload database that we need to create an index, remove index, or force the execution plan, we are going to do by for you. Okay, so we have other things, and also in SQL managed instance, you have, let's say, very important two things that is very important for DBAs. There is not possible to change the full the recovery model in your database. Always will be full. Okay, and also it's the compatibility level. Yes, you could choose all the compatibility levels that we have from, I don't remember, it's 2005, if I remember well, until 2019. So that's not mean that in SQL Azure you are going to be take some be afraid that, okay, I'm going to use the last version of the engine. No, you are going to use the engine that you choose based on the compatibility level, but you could have other operations or other options that you don't have in on-premises. Okay, so I'm not going to take more because I would like to give more time to Roberto. As you will see, as I mentioned, this is automate auto-tuning. And also one thing that is very important, much probably you know, is accelerate database recovery. You know that, in on-premises, in previous version, when something happened in my database, during a huge transaction, I need to wait to the, if I need to restart the service, I need to wait for the completion of the transactions, okay, in this recovery process. Right now, it's very fast because we use accelerated database recovery. So I don't know if you have any questions, but I would like to transfer right now the floor to my colleague Roberto about the demo.
Okay, okay, Roberto. Now I will make you presenter.
All right.
Okay, now you are presenter.
All right. Thank you. So let me share my screen with you all, and we'll have about 4 minutes. I will show you some more information about performance monitoring. So what you see now on your screen, or I think it's loading right now. Yep, I see. All right. Let me turn off my the webcams, or let me ignore that. Let's see. If there is some slowness, please let me know. What you see on your screen right now is a document with a series of steps on how to monitor not just SQL Server, but most importantly, Azure SQL Database and managed instance with DMVs that are specific for managed instance. And I will share this document with you, but you see here on the table of contents, a series of issues that a DBA would see on a daily basis. And on this document, we are covering multiple steps on how to identify, for example, expensive queries by CPU, things that are common for you to do with SQL Server. But in this document, you see the DMVs that are specific for Azure SQL Database and managed instances. We also cover here the monitoring from the Azure portal. And that's how I would like to start real quickly, showing you how you can monitor using performance, under performance down here, intelligent performance. I'm looking at the Azure SQL Database. I have a graphical interface that gives me details about queries and what they are doing. It's called QPI, Query Performance Insight. And here in Query Performance Insight, you have a time series showing you how much CPU was consumed, how much data I/O, how much log I/O, and what query consumed that information. So that is not present nowadays natively in SQL Server. There are tools that will do that, but what I wanted to show you is how you can leverage this built-in tool that was showing me that the reason for that query consuming that much CPU was I have the text for that query. And you see here the query ID that's coming from directly from the query store. So if I use, for example, my uh, management studio, I could use the query store to track that specific query. So I'm pointing to the same database, SMCDB1, and if I plot here that number, 3509, 3509, I'll be able to see the behavior of this query over time on Management Studio, just to show you that it's coming from Management Studio. Since SQL Server 2016, you have that same capability, but in Azure SQL Database, that's there for both managed instance, Azure SQL DB. But in SQL managed instance, we do not have that graphical interface that I showed you that can give you this information. What we do have is a QPI add-on that you can use to create queries and manage your database using DMVs. DMVs is specific to QPI. So on this notebook, I have here a few queries that I ran and saved the result for this presentation. One of the queries is DMDB resources stats, which is part of MI and SQL DB, which will tell you the CPU percentage, data I/O, log writes, which in SQL Server you would use perfmon or other tools like that. And with QPI, what our colleague if you click here, you go to the author of QPI. What this colleague did was to encapsulate many different DMVs inside of some DMVs that he created that we can use, like this one here for weights, for example. So I'm selecting from QPI.OS weight stats, as you can see here, right? OS weight stats snapshot. And the techniques on how to use this are on this website. So I'll share with you the links to this website, the link to a few other tools that I'll show you quickly. If we go to the next tool, actually, I don't think we have time to show all the tools as we got to the end of the presentation. It's 3:14, but I will add the links to what we've been talking about and also to this presentation Jose Manuel and I did last year, showing you how to use the newest and best tool that we have so far, Azure SQL Monitoring, monitoring SQL Insights, Azure Monitoring SQL Insights. And you guys can please ping us if you have any questions. And I'm sorry we ran out of time, but let me go back to Jose Manuel and we can finish the session.